Thank you for being on Over
Hello.
the Fence. It's very nice to see you today. Welcome. This will be the 12th episode for Over the Fence, and we're really excited to have you with us. Here in Kerrville, I'm sure a lot of people will recognize your face and your name, but for those that are watching and listening, you're Greg Richards, and you are a local, you're a lawyer. You've been here, I think, in Kerrville for, since 1995, if I'm remembering correctly. And
Right.
you also sit currently on the EIC board, which is our Economic Improvement Corporation board. So I'm not going to give just a lengthy introduction. I'll allow you to kind of give a little bit more of a background yourself, since you'll be better at introducing yourself in that manner. But I do think it's really important for people to know that one thing that I found really interesting about a little bit about your background of your story is that you relocated here like a lot of people do, but you relocated in a way that I don't think a lot of people do, which was just to kind of get here and then maybe figure some things out. And so I would like for you to talk a little bit about that in your introduction. But I think mostly what you are known for here, especially within your law practice, is your broad knowledge of business, your legal knowledge of the real estate industry itself, and your wonderful wealth of knowledge and your problem solving skills. And so I am really excited about this conversation. We've had lots of opportunities to talk in person, and I'm happy that you get to share all of your wonderful words of wisdoms with us today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So I won't give you the tombstone version of my introduction. Generally, I went to Baylor. I like to say I went to Baylor to find religion and Texas Tech to test it. But I didn't really get much of a chance to test it at Tech because it was a lot of studying. But the one thing that I think is going to be relevant for the folks that are watching this is really just to hear a little bit about my story about people don't always think about lawyers as business people, but it's a business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have to manage insurance policies and employees and pay rent and utilities and, you know, all the stuff that other businesses do. But instead of selling widgets, I sell time and advice,
Yeah.
As Abraham Lincoln said. So my practice was really born out of necessity. I was 1 year out of law school, married with a brand new baby, and the job that I was working in was not a long-term option. And so I knew I wanted to move someplace where I could raise my family and where I could, be close enough to a metropolitan area to kind of enjoy its benefits, but not to have to live in it. So I had never been to Kerrville. Kerrville made the short list of about 4 towns that I was looking at, and I ultimately chose it. I rented an apartment over the phone. I showed up here in a U-Haul van on a Friday. I rented an office on a Monday. I went to a bank and borrowed $5,000 so that I could buy a desk and a computer, and I hung out my shingle and just started trying to make it work. And 26 years later, here I am. So it can be done. If a country lawyer from East Texas can do it, you can do it.
And yeah, I love that story. So I think we get a lot of people coming into Kerrville. You know, they've done their research. They maybe have visited. And I always say, once you visit, you're going to find a way to come back and stay. Just be prepared. But yeah, I love that story. I love that story. What a tremendous leap of faith, and two, just such a amount of determination of saying, yep, I'm here and it's going to happen. So.
Well, and I would say the 2 most important things to keep in mind were just in terms of my success, if you want to call it that, just of still being here 26 years later, is diligence and perseverance and lots of God's grace.
Yeah.
So that can be a pretty good combination for anybody that's looking to start.
Yeah.
Well, I want to start, and I want to tell a story about a guy that I find very fascinating. And if you remember back from, if you're my age at 50, you probably heard a guy named Paul Harvey. He used to tell these stories on the radio called The Rest of the Story. And so I want to tell you kind of a Paul Harvey-esque story, and I want to kind of look into it and highlight some of the things we can learn about this guy's story. So the guy I want to tell you about is a guy named Eric. So Eric is my age. He's actually a year younger. He's 50 now. I'm 51. And when he was in college, he had to take a train ride 10 hours to go see his girlfriend. And he hated the train ride. And he kept thinking there's got to be a better way that I can see and talk to her versus having to get on this train and make this long journey. So it started with an idea. He had an idea and he spent a lifetime developing it. So he heard a talk from Bill Gates about the internet, and he decided, you know what, this is the future, and I want to try to learn more about it. So his idea gave birth to a plan of action. He decided to go to college. He decided to go into the field of technology, and so he got a job. He made his way to America, Silicon Valley, got a job working as a programmer for a company. And what he learned was that his company was not very good at what it did. And so he listened to the customers of the company, and they kept saying, there's got to be a better way, there's got to be a better way. So he decided to strike out on his own and do his own thing and to create his better widget for the world to enjoy. So he gathered some smart people around him, and he launched his own company. And he faced withering competition. Lots of other people were working in his space. But for years, as the CEO of the company, he was intimately involved in what it was doing. And what's really cool is that he answered customer complaint emails personally. So when they would call and say, oh, your product's not working the way it's supposed to, he would literally write the people back and engage them in the conversation to figure out what's wrong and how can we improve it. And he listened. That was a very key step. And so he worked night and day to improve his project, and slowly he grew his company. And then, in the literal blink of an eye, his company became one of the most successful companies in the world. In the first 2 months of 2020, this year, his company added more customers than they did in the entirety of 2019. And in one day, in March of 2020, his app that he created was downloaded 2.13 million times in one day. And his average of daily users grew from 10 million in December of last year. As of March of this year, he has 200 million users of his app. When he started this company, which you and I know as Zoom, it had a market value of nothing because it was a startup. Now it has a market value of $42 billion, and it's ranked by Glassdoor, who some of you may be familiar with. They rate companies based on how good they are to work for. They're currently number 2 in the world.
Wow.
So just an incredible story of somebody that took idea, put intentionality with it, persevered through the difficulties, and in one day where the rest of us were going, oh my God, our world has changed, he's saying, oh my God, the world has changed in my favor.
Yeah.
So he was literally, what is that? I guess if he's 50 now, 30 years ago, he was looking over the fence to figure out how do I create something? Do I get extra bonus points for working that in?
Yes. Thank you, Greg.
So he literally, he was able to look far enough into the future to say, hey, this is a need that needs to be met. And now it's used worldwide by, boyfriends who want to talk to their girlfriends, doctors doing telehealth, CEOs collaborating on the next, global conglomerate. And it's super successful. But I want to draw out of his experience just a couple of things. And I think it's easy for any of us to look at circumstances like Eric's and say, well, gosh, he was really smart and he worked in Silicon Valley and he had lots of advantages. But he started with an idea. And I just can't stress the significance of when you are living in your environment and you're seeing what you see and hearing what you hear, and you start to pick up on those things that you're like, I think I see something there. That's the seed that grows into the 100-year-old oak tree that everybody looks at and says, isn't that wonderful? So first thing he did was he had an idea, but then he introduced intentionality into his idea. He made an effort to get started. And his way of starting was, I'm going to go to work for somebody and learn this industry so that I can understand it better. And then as he was working in the industry, he paid attention. So most importantly, he paid attention to the customers. He was listening to the people that were using the product and hearing where they were frustrated, and he filed all that stuff away. And then at one point he said, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to go do it myself. And so he gathered up a handful of people and he worked night and day. He apparently, I read this somewhere, that he personally has done the lion's share of the coding, at least for the initial version. So constantly working and revising and improving and making it better and better and better, all to get it to be what it is today. And he overcame numerous obstacles. He fought against lots of competition. I'm sure there were lots of times where he was sitting there thinking, how am I going to get past this? How am I going to raise the money? How am I going to find the employees? How am I going to get it all done? But he persevered through those obstacles and obviously became the success that he is. And then finally, even to this day, that company is constantly improving and evolving their product. So it's almost a cycle where, you know, he's still continuing to learn and develop and adapt and listen to the customer and improve his product so that he has success. So I think that anybody that's considering, hey, I've got an idea and it might work, it can work. And I think some of the things that we learned from Eric are stuff that we can all put into practice as we decide to stretch our entrepreneurial legs. I keep a quote taped on my computer screen right here among several that I read very often, and I want to read it to those that are listening. It says, successful leaders see the opportunities in every difficulty rather than the difficulty in every opportunity. Resilient people view problems as challenges and opportunities for growth rather than threats. And I think that is just so appropriate for where we are as a country right now. Everybody's having to scramble and figure out, how am I going to get these kids educated? How am I going to get the groceries on the table? How am I going to keep my business relevant and adaptive to my customers' needs? But I also think that we see a lot of the other. I've heard among some businesses, you know, they're just mad, and I get it. I mean, it's you know, when you've built a business and it's run well on a certain approach, and then all of a sudden, you know, one day everything changes and the government says, okay, you can't open your business anymore, or you have to do it in a very different way than you have before. You can get angry about it, but you can also get creative about it. And I think, you know, with this COVID crisis and forcing us all to do everything different, I mean, obviously, you know, you've cleaned your house and have this very zen space in the background. So good job.
That's what you think.
Yeah, right. I still haven't figured out how to get those virtual backgrounds. I want like a beach on the background with a Corona sitting right here. But
well, I'll show you. Thank you, Eric. Or maybe I should say thank you to his girlfriend at that time, so that we now have Zoom. So
yeah. Yeah, well, we can all at least appear to be in nicer places.
Yeah.
But with all this that's going on, there really is opportunity here. I mean, just like you know, when I don't know who it was that created, but when whoever made Google Earth and mapped all the streets and roads, and all of a sudden somebody said, you know what, there's a better way to get around town, you know, than hailing a cab. So they created a rideshare app, and now it's a $1 billion business. And not every business has to be a billion-dollar business. A lot of us, me included, I just want to feed my family and, send my kids to school and be able to buy nice hair products.
I know where you get your hair cut too.
Yeah, well, they just cut from the nose down. There's not much to do up here. So life looks different. So we can either see that as a threat or as an opportunity. So I want to kind of talk about small business owners, how they can adapt and overcome during this time. So I think two very important questions to ask yourself are, what can I stop and what can I start? Some of those things may have been dictated for you, but some of those things may not be as obvious. And so for some business owners, they may say, well, take a restaurant, for example. I can't have people in my restaurant anymore because the government's either limited that, or because of safety concerns, I want to limit that.
Yeah.
You have to stop serving people, but you still have all these employees. And I've seen lots of local restaurant entrepreneurs respond to that well. They say, hey, I've still got food, I've still got a chef, I've still got a kitchen, and I've still got employees, and those employees have vehicles. I'm going to start delivering my food.
Yes.
I'm going to start trying to facilitate a takeout. And so that's an opportunity where, okay, I can't do one thing, but I can start something different that is still within my wheelhouse to provide and that my customers will still want. So I think those are two good questions to ask, is what can you start and what can you stop? I think another good question to ask is, what are my employees and my customers saying? What are they seeing? How do I help solve this problem for them? Because that's really all, any of us that's in any profession, whether you're a plumber, a lawyer, bookseller, cab driver, you're solving somebody else's problem. And so if you're listening to your customer, you're going to understand how that problem is morphing and changing over time and how you can adapt your products and services to be able to meet those demands. Another thing you can do is ask, well, how's my market changing? We're seeing more and more people move to the hill country because they don't want to live in fill in the blank big city.
Yeah.
Because it is a very different environment. So what are those people? What kind of market are they driving? What are they used to getting in San Antonio or Austin or Houston that they now want in Kerrville? So I think having your ear to the ground, listening to the market, listening to your customers is important. And then I think it's also helpful to look, what are your competitors doing? Maybe they've got ideas that you can improve upon. I always think about, you probably remember MySpace.
Yes.
Yeah. Nobody uses MySpace. They were the first to the market, but they weren't the best.
I think
so Facebook comes
around.
along. Huh?
I think there might still be some MySpace accounts. We might want to go back to that. We might want to revisit, when how trends fade and then come back. We might want to revisit MySpace.
Right. Well, maybe they will make a comeback. But at least in my experience, the MySpace thing was fun, but Facebook was an improvement on that. Yeah. And so just because your competitors are doing it doesn't mean that you can't do it better. But again, I think it goes back to listening to your customers, listening to the market, et cetera.
Yes.
All right. So if you're a small business owner, there are things you can do to adapt and overcome. But I think there's also probably some listening that fall into a different category. I had a friend not too long ago when we were talking about an opportunity for entrepreneurship. He made the statement, he was considering whether to be an entrepreneur or an employee. And he said, well, I'm going to take the employment route. And I said, well, why is that? And he goes, well, because I have a guaranteed income there. And I said, well, what's guaranteed about it? And he says, well, they pay me every month. I said, well, yeah, they pay you until they don't. And maybe you'll get a heads up on when that's coming. Maybe you won't. So, yes. There are no guarantees in life other than death and taxes, as they say. But if you're an employee and you've been laid off, or you're in a job that you can see may not have viability over the long term, I want to get a little. I'm trying to think of the right word here. A little introspective. And so I think there's value into, if you don't have an idea immediately brewing that you're thinking, okay, this is something that I could do something with, dig into the soil of your soul. You know, so many of us come out of high school or college, and we've got dreams about things we want to do, and then the realities of life set in, right? We, you know, get married and we have kids and we got responsibilities and jobs, and next thing you know, we're just, you know, we're showing up to work to be able to put food on the table, and that's very important. But when you don't have options anymore, or when your options are not great, maybe it's time to dig around in that soil a little bit and think about, well, what are those ideas I had? Because, you know, like Eric's story shows, you know, ideas driven by passion can have amazing results.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you're not passionate about your idea, you know, it's not going to last very long, even if it's a good one. So I think it makes sense to dig around and see what you might be able to turn into reality. Another thing that you can consider, if you've been working in an industry for a while, whatever it is, whether you're cleaning houses, you know, doing plumbing, electrical work, working at a dry cleaner, what can you do better than your boss does? What insight do you have? Maybe you've worked in the industry for years, and you know you're frustrated that your boss won't embrace technology, or you know won't achieve efficiencies that are otherwise available in the market. You know, can you go out and compete and do better? So there's an opportunity there. If you're in a career that's not has any viability, and the one that comes to mind is, can you imagine the guy that years ago was the Kodak camera repairman? I mean, that guy doesn't have a job now,
Yeah.
right? So what can you do to pivot? What other opportunities? How can you take your skill sets and deploy them in a different way to solve a problem that the world seems to have? So I want to hit on some things that I read in an interview with Eric Yuan, and give you 5 things that Eric wished he wished someone would have told him before he launched his business. And I think these will be good things to consider for those that might be considering jumping into the deep end of the pool. So the first one is that although the startup journey is long and tough, it is fun and exciting. Don't be afraid to start, just go for it. And so many times that, you know, that's the first step. That's the scariest step. Is I always think about that movie Indiana Jones, when he had to, you know, kind of take that step off the cliff, and he couldn't see the bridge, you know.
Yes.
When you leave the security of the foot that's on solid ground and your weight shifts to the other foot that doesn't know where it's going to land, that's the scariest moment. But it's just something that you got to do if you're going to get past it. So just go for it. The second thing that Eric said is, you don't need to hire the people who are the most qualified on paper. Hire people that are highly self-motivated and self-learners. And I've seen that in my business. I've hired a handful of people over the years, and what's on paper is not everything. It's part of the picture, but it's not the whole picture. And I'd almost rather have somebody that's motivated and intelligent and willing to learn than I would somebody who thinks that, you know, they've learned it all and know it all, and you know, are bringing what skills they have, but they don't feel like a need to be able to adapt, because we're constantly adapting.
Yes.
Every business goes through changes, and you either adapt or you don't, you get left behind. The third thing he said was, your company's culture is the #1 most important thing to get right. And it makes sense, because it's all about the people. If you don't enjoy working there, if you don't enjoy the people you work with, you're on the short calendar for how long you're going to be there, because it's just not very rewarding. So get your culture right. And I was talking to a business owner yesterday that came in and inherited a bunch of employees, and they weren't necessarily bad employees. They just didn't fit his paradigm. And so he's gone through a transition of hiring new employees that do fit his paradigm, and he's finding that, you know, his life and his business is thriving because of it, because he's being very intentional about the culture that he's creating.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that is sometimes overlooked. And I think it sometimes is one of the biggest causes, especially for people coming in and taking over a business, sometimes one of the biggest causes for a business failure. I recently listened to a podcast about how there was a business owner that really struggled with that, especially kind of like the employee relations parts of things, and really struggled with keeping employees on that really weren't a good fit, and actually really interrupted the culture and the environment of the business. And I know it's difficult to do, especially in this time, when you're talking about wanting to employ people, but I'm so glad that you brought that up, because culture is just such an incredible part of the way your business operates, and how that translates into passion, and again, into customers specifically.
Yeah, one of my mentors years ago said something. I don't think it was original to him, but it sounded good, but it took me a while to really embrace it as a truth. And I can tell you with absolute candor that it's true, is that hire slowly, fire quickly.
Yes.
When it's not right, it's just not right. And they're just, especially when it comes to culture dynamics, you've got limited ability to train around that. You can train skills, you can train processes, but a lot of times it's hard to train culture. So I think taking that advice is probably a good thing to do.
Yep.
And then his last and final piece of advice, of his top 5 things that he wanted somebody to have told him before he started, was everybody's going to need money to start a business. That's inescapable. And I'll talk about that in part 2 of how you go about getting some of that money. But when you're going out and you're looking for investors, you want to find people that are not just passionate about your business idea, but they're passionate about you. They want to invest in you. They want to see you grow and develop and evolve. If an investor is just about the money, then that's all they're going to focus on is, what is the bottom line? What does this benefit me? And that's a fair thing for investors to want. It's just not the only thing. Mm-hmm. You want an investor who has the long vision of, believing in somebody and watching them develop and grow and overcome and build something that really has lasting power.
And you've just brought in so many key components of individual aspects of things that we've talked about with business owners throughout all of the individual podcasts that we've done over the course of the last, about 11 weeks. And I think it kind of highlights the fact that these are all proven methods or proven concepts, and very specifically about people that want to invest in you. And they're not only investing in you, but they're also investing in your passion, I think. And that's such a key component. Just a couple of things one of the things that you just shared in the midst of everything that really has stood out to me. And I think because I tend to err on the side of emotions a little bit more, and passion, of course, which I think comes out on this podcast, which is really digging into that soil of your soul and finding what that passion is. And the other part of that was, when you find that idea, one of the things in one of the other podcasts that we talked with Carrie and Pat Wilt about was that, listening to your customers and taking those ideas and making them your own, I think they called it grape juicifying it, right? So you take an idea from a customer or from another business and you make it fit whatever your culture of your business is. And so you've brought together so many different components of things that we've talked about, and that again are just incredible and have really been proven here in the midst of these trying times in our community and with business owners here. And I think the other thing, very specifically, again, is that being able to adapt and have that mentality of thinking outside of the box. We've again heard that so many times from the businesses that we've spoken to on the podcast, and really not becoming stagnant either. So, and in that, I think also is having, when you have that idea or you have that thought, that it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, that you can take it and take that first leap, and don't let the fact that it's not fully developed or it's not a perfect concept, don't let that stop you from moving forward with something that you're passionate about.
Well, and Pat and Kerry are great examples of both the passion and the adaptability. I mean, I think if Pat was on this video screen right now, he would tell you that, he didn't start to go out in the restaurant business,
right?
But he listened to his customer, and although he might tell you on first blush his passion is wine, his passion is really people. It's the people that work for him. It's the people that come into his restaurant, and that shows, and people pick up on that, and they want to support you, and they want to see you be successful. So it really is a good exercise to dig into, where do my passions lie? Where do I have some talents and some exposure to problem solving, and how can I bring that to the world? I want to end with just a summary of something I read recently that I thought was very powerful. There's a book by David White, a friend sent me unsolicited, that I just finished reading. It was fantastic. It's called Crossing the Unknown Sea. And he's a pretty heady guy, and he writes about some of these deep concepts. But one of the things that he said that has really stuck with me is, he said, so many people spend their lives sailing their ship around the safety of the inlets and harbors. And it's that rare individual who's willing to trim his sails and strike his rudder against the open sea. And that's where it gets scary. But it's also where you find that you have more capacity than you really think you did. I mean, when you get put into a situation where you got to figure out how to get out of it, that's where you really grow. It's where you really find where your talents are, and it builds teams. When you go through adversity, if you've been through adversity with anybody, it builds relationships. So
yes.
Good stuff. And it's kind of a constant reminder that, as long as can see the harbor over there and see the land, I can always, jump off of the boat and swim back to shore. But for a lot of people, maybe it's the right time to say, all right, I'm trimming my sails, and I'm gonna set out for open water.
And I think, again, we've had that opportunity. I think in the midst of this, you hit on another thing of when you're talking about leaders and the difference in the way they see that it's not a problem versus an opportunity, or and I think we've seen that in so many of the businesses that have remained open, are still open, and have remained, have continued to be able to do business, not only just in our community, but in others, and how they've innovated and pivoted and adapted through all of that. And I love the fact that you brought up the opportunities for new entrepreneurs coming in. And it kind of goes back to a little bit of a conversation that we had before we started recording, which was necessity is the mother of invention, right? Which we talked about with Eric. And there's always going to be a need. So if you can find that passion and you can fit that to a need that is around you, and you can make that first step and get out there and overcome that little bit of fear that might be there, or that reservation, it's great things. And we're seeing examples of that all around us right now. And so you've done an incredible job of just really summarizing so many things that we've had the opportunity again to talk about, but in such a succinct and articulate way. You just wrapped it up so incredibly well. I do want to tell people we are going to do a 2-part series with you. This will be the first part. And the reason we chose to do this was because you were going to be our keynote speaker at the Office of the Governor's Small Business Series, which we had initially planned to hold we were the host here in Kerrville on March 26th. And unfortunately, that was not an in-person event that we could have. We did have the opportunity to be a co-host for that event with the Office of the Governor and partner with our other 2 Central Texas partners to be able to do that as a webinar. But we really wanted, again, to be able to provide the information to our community and to the larger region, the information and the resources that would have been available to them at that series. So that's kind of how Over the Fence started. You know,
you get credit for pivoting and adapting.
Well, and you know what? It goes back to that mentality for me personally that I'm not a fan of the word postpone or cancel or give up or not going to happen. In fact, if you tell me something can't or that I can't, I'm like, whew, watch me. So maybe there's a little streak of rebellion in there somewhere. But I just, that series in particular was so important to me. And the people that I had lined up to speak, I knew the information that they were going to provide was just so vital to businesses, and especially now, extremely important for our businesses and our community to hear. And so I'm so excited that we're going to have more time to spend with you, and you're really going to dive deeper into more of what you were going to present as our keynote at the Office of the Governor Small Business Series.
Yeah, look forward to it.
So we are going to pause temporarily here, get the first part up, and then you guys will be able to click on part 2 in the series.